It's always a good sign when you have a battle to get people to stop talking when you're here at an event like this. But if I could ask you all just to pause the discussion around the tables, don't worry, we're going to have plenty of chance to continue that. But first of all, we've got some business to do. So I'm going to perch here. Hopefully everyone can see and hear me okay. Are you okay at the back of the room? You hear okay? Excellent, thank you. Well, it's very, very nice to be here with you all. And for anyone that doesn't know me, my name's Hayaatun Sillem, and I'm the CEO of the Royal Academy of Engineering and the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering Foundation, which is quite a long job title. And it's my extremely great pleasure to welcome you on this lovely sunny day to our annual lunch that celebrates International Women in Engineering Day. We call it our leadership lunch, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But it's a marvellous opportunity to come together to celebrate the really important contributions that so many women in engineering do make, and to both reflect and look forward around some of the challenges that we still face when it comes to diversity and inclusion in engineering. Before we get into the meat of today, a few housekeeping notices. We have not been informed of any fire drills, so if you do hear the alarm, please follow the Academy staff who will make themselves known to you and lead you out of the building. There are exits on both sides and they will take you to the muster point. Secondly, just a quick reminder, if you could turn your phones to silent, it will save your embarrassment and mean that as we're recording this, we won't have to have interruptions. But please do feel free to post on social if you would like to, if there's something that you think is worth sharing. You can feel free to do that, and I believe the hashtags are enhanced by engineering and eng diversity, and they are on the screens around the room as well. If you prefer to go old school, there are also post-it notes and pens and paper on your table, and please do feel free to capture some of the things that strike you as important, significant. You can keep them for yourself, but also if you leave them on the tables at the end, we will enjoy reading the things that were meaningful to you. So please do use those as well. So I think that most of us here know what International Women in Engineering Day is, but let's just remind ourselves that for 11 years, INWED, as I'm going to call it for short, has been celebrating and raising the profile, the visibility of women engineers around the world, providing a platform to showcase the important contributions that they make in an industry where, unfortunately, women continue to be significantly underrepresented. This year's theme centres on the notion of enhanced by engineering. So it gives us a chance to think about individuals who've not only enhanced our everyday lives today, but perhaps are also shaping what lives may be in the future and who can benefit from that future that we will experience. And at the Academy, as part of our commitment to promoting a more diverse and inclusive engineering profession, we're committed to shining a light on not just these engineering feats, but also the pioneering minds behind them, whose progressive thinking continues to inspire us all. We're really delighted to have an amazing mix of people in the room here today. I won't say handpick, but almost handpick the attendance for this particular event to get a wonderful blend of people. So we've got some incredible senior leaders from industry and some earlier career engineers, but actually I think every single person in this room is a leader. It's just some of us have a job title that says that, and some of us are in stealth mode. That's the way I like to look at it. And I also extend a very warm welcome to our allies and champions of diversity and inclusion, who are also an extremely important part of the conversation today. This idea that we embrace intergenerational exchange between people who have different perspectives, experiences and vantage points is very much at the heart of the Academy's theme for the year, which is harnessing the power of diversity of thought. So we want to live that. We want to benefit from all of your diverse perspectives and experiences to enrich our conversation today. Now, in recent weeks, I'm sure lots of you noticed that we had a stark reminder of why days like INWED are still needed. So last month, Engineering UK published the latest data on the proportion of women in the UK engineering workforce, and it showed that we had gone down to 15.7% from 16.5%. Now, this is disheartening for sure, but I personally am not going to fixate on that number, because I think the more important point is that we're not going in the right direction fast enough. And we knew that before this latest drop in numbers. What is interesting is that we can see from the latest data that efforts to attract more women into engineering careers are having some impact. Albeit, we would like to go faster. But the research shows that the drop is really due to failing to retain women. So the most significant drop of the data is in women aged between 35 and 64. And that means that women with experience, women who've already invested in and committed to becoming an engineer, to work in engineering, are leaving the industry at a disproportionate rate and at a rate we simply can't afford. You'll also find on your tables some little booklets, and that summarises our recent work at the Academy, which was launched this week, on restating, remarshalling the evidence to support the business case for the benefits of equality, diversity and inclusion. And it really just underscores the fact that the evidence does show that diverse teams working in inclusive environments result in business success, whether that's in terms of people, partnerships, products or services. And so the publication is a little meta review of the evidence that's out there. And just to highlight a couple of the findings that we showcase, 81% of engineers prioritise diversity when choosing their employer, and 53% noted that feeling included at work increased their motivation, just in case anyone still needed convincing. So, I mentioned earlier that the Academy's theme for the year on diversity and inclusion is harnessing the power of diversity of thought. And I suppose that represents the fact that diversity is not only about representation, it's also about the strength in breadth and the strength in difference that underlie why diversity matters. And it also reflects the fact that we really believe, and we believe the evidence shows, that diversity of thought, when properly harnessed, can help to create more inclusive outcomes for society. So what we know already is that for society to be enhanced by engineering, our current 8 million strong engineering workforce needs more women to both enter and stay in our profession. It means that we need more women to feel that engineering careers represent a lifelong professional home, professional mission for you, for us, and for other underrepresented groups, which provide those career progression opportunities and a cultural context in which everybody feels that they can give off their best, that they can have their own career enhanced by engineering, and they can contribute to society being enhanced by engineering. One of my absolute favourite things about our INWED leadership lunch, I have many, is that I get to share the stage with somebody that I really admire, an inspirational leader who is also women engineering, and we get to have a good old natter about all things diversity and inclusion. And a close second for my favourite thing about this event is that we get to hear from and engage with an awesome audience. So please don't think you've come here just for lunch. I'm really sorry if that's what you're looking forward to, the delicious food, which is coming, I promise. Actually, what we're really looking forward to is hearing your reflections, hearing your questions, and then we'll have ample opportunity to continue that dialogue over lunch. So to make sure we've got plenty of time for all that, I'm going to stop talking now and I am going to welcome to the stage our fantastic guest speaker, Rachel Skinner CBE. Rachel is an Executive Director at WSP, where she now leads on UK, ESG and government relations, having previously led its transport business. She is a patron of Women in Transport, which is a not-for-profit, having been one of its founding board members back in 2005. She also chairs our own External Affairs Committee here at the Academy and is a past president of the Institution of Civil Engineers. She chairs the Infrastructure Carbon Workstream of the Infrastructure Client Group, as well as the Department for Transport Task Force focused on employment and skills. And I've basically just given you the highlights, otherwise we would have used the entire time to talk about Rachel's incredible achievements. And we're going to hear more about that. So welcome to the stage, Rachel. So Make yourself comfortable. We were just saying we're very glad these are proper chairs. We're not fans of bar stools. No. Uninclusive furniture for speaking events. Great. So I am really looking forward to having a chat with you, and I'm going to have to be very self-disciplined not to use all the time with my own questions, because there's lots I'd like to ask you about. But let's start with today's, the theme for INWED, which is, of course, enhanced by engineering. I'd love to know, what does this mean to you, and how does that relate to your experience in engineering so far?
These are big questions. I'll start with the big questions. No, fantastic. So, hi everybody. Gosh, you've just heard my potted CV there. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But never mind. Yeah, quite busy.
We didn't talk about the fact you're also a mother. Yes.
Yes.
We can
just finished GCSEs this week.
Yeah.
Yes. I feel like I've gone around again, but there we go. Yes. So 16, 14 and 11-year-olds. Yes. And went to the school play last night to see a lost boy.
Oh.
Peter Panning.
Oh, right.
no, he was
I was worried.
Lost. He was suitably lost, it's fine. Right, so no, hang on. Right, so your question, right, so the theme for the year and what does it mean and so on. So my route into engineering in general, I guess, is probably one that actually quite a lot of you can relate to, because I fell into it completely by accident. So I, from a school point of view, always did what I enjoyed, ended up doing a geography degree. I think we had 2 hours of transport lectures within that. That was enough to get a graduate job. Back at the time when I was thinking I really should just get a job and then I'll see how it goes. Anyway, so went through kind of geography into transport, then discovered this world of engineering, I suppose. And so my perspective for the last, 26 years, has very much been one through a kind of a built environment kind of a lens. So obviously there's lots of different types of engineering, but my own sort of route to this point has been very much, I guess, growing into that sort of civil engineering space, hence the president role at the ICE and that kind of thing. So from my point of view, I'm actually, if I'm honest, a little bit confused, I guess, by this enhanced by engineering theme, because in my head, absolutely, literally everything, and I mean everything, that we can sort of touch, use, see, feel, rely on, experience, whatever, by definition, if it's part of a built environment or is a system, that operates within the built environment, it's all engineering, right? And this is the bit where I get a bit confused, because I'm left with thinking, well, how do other people not see this? Why is it we have this disconnect between needing to feel that we're sort of justifying our enhancements, when actually, in terms of the built environment, we are literally the reason why these things work and move and function and so on. So I guess in my head, I've interpreted it slightly as kind of, the things that exist because of engineering, the things that are then constantly improved by engineering and that side of things. And I suppose if you take that perspective and you kind of look backwards a minute, you could say, well, wow, haven't we done an amazing job? Because, society today all over the world's been founded on, quality, improving quality of life all over the world for communities of all different sizes and scales and all different geographies, all the rest of it. But that's where I hit a real problem with this theme actually overall as well, I suppose, because of course, along the way, and not on purpose, we've actually built our society on some really bad habits and behaviours, and we'll talk a lot more, I'm sure, in a minute around things like, economic growth founded on fossil-fuelled economies and all that kind of side of things. We've, I suppose, almost been sleepwalking into this situation where now, actually, the enhanced by engineering tagline perhaps needs to be around how we address the huge problems that then lie in front of us, because yes, we've come so far and we've done great stuff for, in terms of social benefit and so on, but it is absolutely not fair and equitable as things are right now out there in society, whether you look around here or all over the world, and it's absolutely not sustainable or resilient in terms of what we've actually created, because we are now dealing with a climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, etc., etc. So to me, the really exciting bit is that all this means that going forward, engineering has such a fundamental place in fixing all that stuff and actually allowing us to continue with this quality of life that we're all striving for all the way through. And I suppose if I can just sort of come to a little personal kind of anecdote and to do with my year as ICE president. So it was the depths of COVID, the year I got. So I went nowhere, spoke to everybody on a screen all year. I think I basically didn't leave my house about 6 times to go and do anything to do with that role. But one of the real successes, I suppose, that I genuinely do count as a success, although people say, oh no, that's terrible. In that ICE year, I spent the year talking about climate action for civil engineers. Like, wake up. We have got to get on with this decarbonisation stuff. We have also got to recognise there's decarbonisation is the attack strategy, and there's a whole big resilience piece in terms of defending against the effects of what's to come. I got hate mail. Not much, but I actually got hate mail. I look at people's eyebrows like, oh my God. I even got a hate poem. It just shows how bored people were in COVID, doesn't it? Somebody had time. There was a pattern in terms of the people who chose to write to me in that role. Let's just say it was mainly people of, more advanced years, and let's just say they were all men. And that's not to do down any of the men in the room or whatever. And perhaps it reflects the nature of the sort of people at that senior end of the profession and so on in the current time. But they were picking up on two things. First of all, they were absolutely incensed. I mean, properly angry. I mean, you have to be pretty angry to put pen to paper or finger to keyboard or whatever, about the fact that I was commenting on the fact that engineering had caused harm. They just, they just couldn't quite get it, that here I was inside their tent talking about the fact that actually there was a problem. And the second thing that a few people got angry about was that I talked quite often about how I took inspiration around the theme I'd chosen from my own kids. Yeah. And one particular story, I mean, this is the one who's just finished her GCSE, so she's 16 now, but at the time she was about 10. She came home from school one day in tears, and apologies to those who've heard me say this lots of times before, came home from school in tears because one of her classmates was talking about climate change. And this other kid, Olivia, had done a very nice job of setting out the fact she was quite scared. And of course, we're all very familiar with this narrative now. We've all heard it and so on. But to have that going on in my actual kitchen was a real moment in terms of, right, I'm going to do this. But it was so fascinating. The feedback I got was, well, that's wrong. You shouldn't be inspired by a problem that's in front of you or your children. What do they know? You should be inspired by your forefathers. And you're just like, I don't get it. Yeah. Does that make sense? That's a very long-winded answer to an
Well, I think you've touched on lots of important topics, and actually, for those of you that didn't see your presidential address and all the work you did during that COVID year as IC president, it's worth saying that it was quite revolutionary in terms of how people used the platform of being the president, and also your ability to communicate so well and so powerfully to perhaps a slightly broader audience than the average. Careful what I say here, than is always the case in terms of senior leaders in our profession. It probably meant you reach a lot more people, but I have to say, saying that one of your success indicators was receiving hate mail, I think is very, very courageous of you.
Well, but it meant I got a reaction.
Exactly, it meant people,
which is great. That was the point.
People cared. So let's try and sort of follow this train of thought a little further. So the Academy's theme, if we intertwine it with the enhanced by engineering pieces, it's about how you get those diversity of perspectives actually translating into more inclusive outcomes. So everyone's experiencing this benefit of enhanced by engineering rather than a subset.
Absolutely.
Diversity of voices doesn't automatically lead to inclusive outcomes. In your professional experience, what has been the key piece of translation between those two things?
Again, these are huge questions, aren't they? And I would say, first up on this one, there are so many links here between what you're asking about and the Engineers 2030 initiative that we're busy bringing through the Academy channels at the moment, because a lot of these sorts of conversations, how do you turn the fact that we've recognised as an issue into something that's actually different in terms of how we attract and retain, but also do better engineering out there?
And just for those who aren't familiar with it, it's really an opportunity for us to come together as an engineering profession and ask ourselves, what do we need engineers to be in 2030 and how we're going to get there?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a very short version.
So my take on that, and I should say it's not necessarily, we're sort of working on trying to pull it all together into one singular kind of a view here. I think maybe there's three kind of big questions that in my head we have to ask ourselves. I think we have to be really clear, what do we mean by inclusive, first of all. So in the world of kind of the built environment and civil engineering, I think the neatest way that I've come across of describing it, and it'll be interesting to see if it translates actually into other types of engineering as well, we genuinely achieve inclusive engineering outcomes, so not to do with the people who are doing the engineering, but the actual outcome for society. We genuinely have the best chance of doing that when our own engineering community best reflects the people for whom we're trying to generate those outcomes. And it's such an obvious point. And yet I think that is the fundamental problem, is that, this is a rather skewed room, I would suggest at the moment, isn't it? Which is brilliant and fantastic and fantastic to so many of us. But the reality of life is that very often you have teams who are tasked with delivering a particular project or a particular type of change, whatever type of investment it is across, it could be, in my world, it could be transport, water, energy, waste, digital, whatever, any type of change. But if the people sitting around that team are actually not able to put themselves in the shoes of the people they're genuinely trying to make that change for, it's really, really difficult to get it right. And you could say the answer is, better consultation, for example. Yeah, of course that helps. You can hear the views, you can start to sort of assimilate the different technical elements and issues, that kind of stuff. All great, but it's not the same as actually having people sitting inside that team who genuinely walk in those actual shoes, if you see what I mean.
I mean, I suppose there's also the interplay between having enough diversity in those who are the decision makers and the commissioners of those sorts of consultations to really do consultation well, because there's a subtle point around not just technically who had the chance to contribute, but on what terms,
Absolutely.
with what agency, with what flow through into decisions and the information on which the decisions were based. So it's like sort of an extra layer between the two.
Well, it's a whole piece of the engineering process.
It is,
absolutely. Yeah.
Are there any examples where you've seen it done well, or at least done better?
On that specifically, in terms of the kind of the how do you A, recognise your own team maybe doesn't reflect that, and B, go and find, tune in and listen to what's actually needed. I think we actually learned a lot during COVID because there are all kinds of, all kinds of stories around, the way that this consultation sort of process happens. And obviously, if you run, say, an in-person event at a particular time in a particular place, it's limited to the people who can physically get there at the time. So COVID was helpful because it opened it up. And I think, and digital solutions and so on are beginning to help. There are lots of good examples, and there are whole companies now, set up around being able to engage more fully and so on. And I think we are beginning to understand that better. But I think, there's all the classic stuff. I mean, I'm sure we've all read some of the same materials, in terms of invisible women and all this kind of stuff. The actual way in which the questions are posed, the way in which you're thinking about what's up on the table for change, the options you present to people. It's not just about the process, it's also about the technical detail and the decision making that you've already almost accidentally in some cases gone through before you get to that point. And I guess, in my head overall, the other really big thing is then what you do with the outcome of all of that. And this is, coming back to the Engineers 2030 stuff, and it really, really conscious that the word engineers in there is plural.
Yeah.
And that was actually a decision that was something that's changed over the course of the project already. Because what we also have to remember is that an engineer is not a singular thing. We're not all the same. We've all got different skills and talents, and we're good at different things. And that's exactly as it should be, because that is the beginnings of that whole, diversity kind of puzzle, isn't it? But how good are we at really recognising that? Listen, I don't know.
There's something that I want to ask you. I'm
sorry.
really conscious we've got this amazing group of people here. I want to make sure we open up very, very quickly. Before we do that, can I just ask you, what do you see as a relationship between the diversity and inclusion dialogue that we're having and sustainability? Because you have been so passionate about sustainability, and I'm interested if you can explain how those things connect from your frame of reference.
Oh, again, there's so many different things. We'll start the conversation, then we get back to it. So, I think, there are such obvious links between everything we're talking about on the kind of diversity side of the page and then the kind of sustainability side of things. But I guess this is properly defined sustainability is the first thing I would say.
Okay.
So let's not fall into the trap just because lots of others do, that of thinking that sustainability these days is just about climate. No,
absolutely.
There are 17 sustainable development goals. They're all important. We're not achieving against any of them, etc. Some of them touch on resilience as well in terms of, how do we set up the world in a way we can cope with what's coming. So first things first, define what we're talking about properly. But I think also it's really tempting in the world of engineering and solution finding and so on. If we know something's worked before, in whatever domain of engineering and so on, if we know something's worked before, it's very, very tempting to take what we know worked last time and sort of copy, paste, edit it a little bit, and there you go, there's your answer for next time. That happens all the time, but that is totally not what we need in this space right now, as far as I'm concerned, because the whole point around the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the equity sort of crisis points that we're seeing, so it's all these sort of social and economic and environmental dimensions that are all crashing into each other, as we know. we can't do it the way we used to do it. We have to get on the road with much, much faster change, just as you were saying at the beginning in terms of the diversity stats. Now, to me, the way to change things the fastest is actually to change the minds of the people who are actually doing the engineering, and that by definition means opening the door, opening the tent much, much more. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I could speak for hours, I won't, but some of these thoughts just around, who's an engineer? Mm-hmm. Is the process of engineering only done by engineers? I'd say no. There's a lot more people. We need that saying around, it takes a village to raise a child. The trouble is you raise the children, then these engineers you've raised become different people. And let me speak from my own experience there. You raise your child the same way you think you want to do it, and they turn into these like individuals, and they take it on and they change stuff. And it's brilliant and it's fabulous. But equally, the reason for needing to change, to me, is all totally driven by that big picture sustainability thing. Do we want to have a quality of life in 30, 40, 50 years' time? Do we want our kids, the next generation, to have a decent quality of life? Or do we actually want them simply to be dealing only with disaster and crisis?
Oh, well.
There's a big question. I mean, I'm pretty sure we can all agree on what the answer is.
But I think it's a good point, which to open up our discussion. So we have some microphones, and if you could introduce yourself and just so that we know roughly who you are, and then ask your question, make your comment, and we'll gather up a few, and then we'll come back to Rachel for some responses.
If I remember them.
I'll give you
down.
Got my pen to hand. And everyone is welcome. Please don't feel inhibited. If you've got something you'd like to share, then please do. So I think we've got one here, first of all.
Thank you. Susan Robson from the Women's Engineering Society. I'd like to ask you both, really, seeing as I'm making an assumption here that you're in the 30 to 60 bracket.
Correct.
You. What do you think's underlying that statistic? What have you heard in your roles? I'm not talking about you personally, although if you've got some personal experience, it'd be good to hear that. But given your roles, what are you hearing are the reasons that women in those age brackets are leaving?
Yeah, really important question, Susan, thank you. And then any other questions that way before I send the microphone over here? Yes, please, Rachel, thanks.
Rachel Oliver from the University of Cambridge. I'd really be interested to hear your thoughts in terms of the crossover between EDI and sustainability, about what engineers should be doing to ensure that, like, the Global South really receives justice in this sustainability drive that we all need to make.
Thank you, Rachel. And then we have a question over here, please. Sorry, she's making you run. Get your steps in today. Over here, please, at the front.
Hi, Rachel. Al Tower. I just wanted to ask you, I'm a professional registration interviewer with the IET. Mm-hmm. So I interview chartered engineers for certification. And when you ask them in one of the competencies, what do you understand by sustainability? Yeah. And the blank stare across the face says it all.
Wow.
And so my question to you is, how do we raise the awareness, especially of potential engineers, of that issue? Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to be rude and make an assumption as well. I say I'd like a younger voice. All of your questions were excellent. But yes, I can see one here. So sorry, Katie, I'm really... Is there a second mic? I feel really bad. Oh, yes, thanks. I think Paula's at that.
Here we go.
Yes, that's right. Smiling face here. That's hand waving. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Microphone might need to... Yep, we can.
Okay. Georgia Thompson from Costain. My question's around when we think about diversity of thought, just generally, diversity always tends to be a certain type of woman. So how can we change the narrative of what women we are trying to attract to the industry?
Thank you very much, Georgia. So we've got 4 great questions there. Rachel, although one was partially addressed to me, I'm going to let you have the first go, and then I can add a few thoughts as well.
Okay.
Have you got them all?
I think so. No, I think so. Should we try and do them in order really briefly? Why is the percentage dropping? I mean, I think the first bit is it's a percentage. So I guess, obviously there's level change in there as well as percentages. In terms of why maybe the percentage of women has fallen over the last year. It feels to me it must be something to do with sort of after effects of COVID and ways of working and that kind of thing, and perhaps sort of a recalibration of, you know, home versus professional life, that kind of thing. I'm not sure I have direct evidence of that, but anecdotally I think I can hear that coming through. Do you want to just pick up on that one as we go? And then we
Yeah, so similarly, there isn't any concrete evidence. There is an absolute, you know, it's, I think something like 66,000 women leaving the profession. That group is a significant number. And I think that engineering is probably one of the sectors that went sort of harder, faster on the return to office policies. And so anecdotally, I can certainly think of a number of people for whom they said that impacted them. I also know that the being home-based often led to slight redistribution in terms of caring responsibilities, and again, harder to get out of that afterwards. But I don't think it's only those factors. I suspect that there are other factors at play, and certainly the work that we have done on trying to understand how different people within engineering, including all the different protected characteristics, not just gender, and how inclusive the profession feels, just shows again and again that if you're an underrepresented group, you experience it as less inclusive, and you know, kind of start drilling down across all the different sorts of things that might make a workplace less attractive and a career less appealing. Unfortunately, those are exaggerated or experienced to a greater extent in underrepresented groups.
No, sure. Second one?
Keep going.
So crossover, the Global South piece, crossover EDI and sustainability and so on. I think this is a really, really, really critical point, isn't it? Because so much of our mindset round here, at least, is driven by our own experience of what we sort of, you know, experience much more locally. It is simply, it cannot be the case that in terms of development curves around, you know, around the world as we go forward, they cannot follow exactly the same path as the ones that over the last 200 plus years we've been following, starting from Iron Bridge onwards type thing. How we do that in practice, though, how do we actually get this fair, equitable way of developing? There's nothing wrong in my head with the principle, obviously, of, you know, having economic or socio-economic growth. How do we do that, though, while we also address the fundamental challenges of how we've gone about doing that until now? That is a really, really thorny question. There is, though, a lot of, I think, really promising work and discussion happening in all sorts of different engineering circles internationally, where people, they see this issue and they are really trying to kind of dig in and start to figure out how to do this better. I think the challenge is, though, it's a two-way street. We've got to listen, we've got to think really hard and actually, you know, pick up on ideas that are very radically different to our own in terms of how we've gone about things so far around here. We can't, it's not about, oh, well, we did it this way, so you need to change. It's like, well, hang on, actually what would work best somewhere else, and what might we learn from that? How might we change some of our systems that way around as well?
You see some of the dialogue shifting in, for example, COP, to have a greater sort of market share of voice from the Global South. Do you think in engineering that we are seeing sufficient sort of mindset shift in terms of people who are in the positions that they can impact that? Specifically around the participation of Global South perspective.
I think we are not going nearly fast enough, is the short way to summarise that. I think there is a whole heap more we should and have to do, frankly, because also it's the case that in many places in the world, there's the geographer in me coming out, that the effects of the climate crisis are already being felt much more keenly and strongly in some of the places that are least able to cope. And therefore, you know, it's essential that everybody is playing their part.
I will just give one shout out to our Engineering X programme, which is a collaboration with Lloyd's Register Foundation, where we've been working on open burning of waste, which is not only a massive human health hazard, but also a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And there, you know, the reality is you cannot make any progress unless you are truly working in a participatory way, an equitable way. So I think there are these pockets where all of us are learning how to do this. It's about doing it more fairly, but it's also about being more impactful. But as you say, I think there's still a long way to go. So keep going, because I want to get
more questions. This is where my notes make no sense. What's the third question? Sustainability, what's meant, I've written down.
Well, it's in the context of registration. So
yes, sorry, yes, that one. Yes, absolutely. I find it fascinating that you've said that. So I'm much more familiar with the ICE process. Obviously, it's the same engineering council piece that sits behind it, but sustainability equally is one of the attributes that sits there as well. I am quite shocked, frankly, that in the 2020s, we're finding people coming through that professional registration process who don't seem to be able to find out what is really meant by sustainability. It is really, it hasn't been hard for 50 years to find out, actually, if you go looking for it, what's meant by it. If that is genuinely the case, it strikes me we have a whole task there to really help people to connect the day job they are doing, which is what you're testing, isn't it? You know, whether it's a technician or incorporated chartered level, whatever it might be. If people are struggling to connect what they do to the big picture of more sustainable outcomes, that actually is quite terrifying, if I'm honest. I guess I feel really strongly that it is such a privilege to do what we do. It is a huge privilege to do what we do, actually, because how many jobs are there out there where you genuinely can say, I changed that, I did that, I improved that. You know, not fiddling around with something that isn't real. It's real, it's tangible, it's right there, and it's really helping people and changing things for better. All of that is part of sustainability. How on earth? Yeah, I'm staggered.
So then the other question from Georgia is also really important around, when we talk about women engineering, are we talking about all women engineering? How can we make this not just inclusive of, you know, gender, but actually people who combine many different characteristics?
Right. And hi, Georgia, lovely to see you in person. We've only talked on a screen before. Anyway, so absolutely. It's anybody and everybody, and it's not even a gender question, really. It's just it is diversity of thought, diversity of people, diversity of experience, diversity of anything we can think of. I do think there's a really interesting point in this, though, because I suspect that the type of people, women, who arrive in engineering through whatever route they've found their way in, the ones who then end up sticking with it, given everything we're saying about, you know, sometimes it is difficult to be in the minority and so on. I suspect perhaps that quite a lot of us in this room share a characteristic that we don't mind being different. Now, if you're going to take something mainstream, yeah, look at that, it's interesting, lots of nodding, I just suddenly caught a reaction. That's fine. Suits people like me just fine, you know, I've never minded being somebody who has an opinion is different. But that's not how you take something to the mainstream. It's not how you become an equal voice. So we've got to find a way. I tell you, it's funny, something I forgot to mention earlier on, but I've been watching very boring things I do at home whilst doing household chores, so like folding endless piles of washing or ironing or cooking or whatever. Found myself watching various episodes of the Great British Sewing Bee.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now, don't know how many of you have watched any of it. How many times do you, there we go, how many times in that programme do you think they mention the word engineering? All the time. All the time. I started counting in one of the episodes. I was so shocked because it wasn't why I was watching it. I just found myself watching it. Now, hang on a minute. There's a group of people, which I suspect by definition, in terms of diversity, it would be somewhat different to our engineering profession if we were to go looking at the viewers of that sort of programme. They are using our language to describe what's happening there. You Hayaatun, we had the cake baking thing for whatever it was.
Yeah, for National Engineering Day.
There we go. Yeah. Not very long ago. It's the same sort of thought process. So in terms of how we attract that mainstream, in terms of how we bring a genuinely more diverse, you know, intersectional range of voices to the table and have those voices heard, we should take advantage of that.
Yeah,
we haven't even noticed they're using our word. And let's not go and slap handcuffs on and say, that's not engineering. Yes, it is. Yes, it is, absolutely. And I think maybe that's part of the trick, is instead of talking about Lego and spaghetti and marshmallows and stuff, maybe we should actually be talking much more around a wider range of hobbies and talents and skills and things people enjoy doing. Kind of going, you do know that's engineering, right?
some absolutely brilliant thoughts there. I will also just add very briefly, Georgia, that I do really want to give a shout out to the grassroots networks and the Association for Black and Minority Ethnic Engineers. I have huge respect for. And we've got obviously Mark here from Equal Engineers, and you know, I'm not saying I don't have huge respect for you too much. That could have been misinterpreted, obviously. But what I mean is that these communities make it a less lonely experience being in a maybe doubly or triply underrepresented group. And so there is no one solution to how we make this change. But I want to recognise that there are people who are doing fantastic work out there right now that is changing the experience of individuals. I want us to get some more questions and comments. Yes, come over here please to Elizabeth, thank you. I'd love to gather up a few, and you're welcome to disagree with anything that you've heard.
Yes,
As long as you're in an inclusive way, of course. Elizabeth, yes, please.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth McKay. I'm the director of the London Transport Museum. So we're really keen to get more young people into engineering, girls into STEM, all that. And I loved your example of using your own daughter, because I use it all the time, and we were just talking about what subjects to study at A-level and everything. But you have to go much younger. I wonder if you have any other insights about what works with really young children, or how young you can go, so you don't end up with floods of tears in the kitchen, the world is ending, you know, because that's not a good place.
No, we don't like the floods of tears in the kitchen. Thank you very much. Yes, in the middle, please. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you. This is Sally Weston from the University of Bristol. When I see undergraduates coming through the various engineering schools, they are taught so many technical skills and they are so excited to deploy them in the world, which is fantastic. But when faced with diversity of thought, how can we adapt the curriculum so that young engineers are taught to learn to listen rather than learn to confirm that this is the right technical solution that they have been taught and want to employ?
Learn to listen rather than learn to confirm. That I'm going to steal that from you. Yes, and over here, please. Isabel, thanks.
Hi, Isabel Coleman from Transport for London. It follows a little bit on from the previous question. How do you think we accelerate change in our processes and systems within organisations that enable more creative thinking and allow diversity of thought to come into how our solutions are created and brought into reality?
Brilliant, thank you, Isabel. I'd like to see some more. Yes, please, at the front here. Thank you. This is our Sewing Bee superfan.
Brilliant.
Yes, a year ago I finally got the courage to buy a sewing machine. Yay! And I've been unstoppable. I'm actually teaching her to sew this weekend.
Wonderful.
In a weekend, I'm impressed.
Do introduce yourself, please, because you must have an identity beyond your superfan status.
I'm Charlotte Vessels, and I'm a chemical engineer and also policy officer for Institution of Chemical Engineers.
Fantastic.
I've been reading a very interesting book that my book club chose. I never would have picked it up myself. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass, and it's a woman who talks about indigenous wisdom, and also she's also a professor in ecology, so she combines it with her knowledge in science. And she tells a story of a friend of hers who had to apply to her native, the community who's been sponsoring her studies, and they were a Native American community. She had to explain to them why she needed funding to go to a conference on sustainability. So she gave them the definition of sustainability, you know, utilizing resources in a way that we can have what we need, but future generations as well. And one of the elders sat back and then said, so sustainability is so that you can keep on just taking in the future as well. And that made her pause for a moment, and it's made me pause. In the sense that we as women can more readily identify with Mother Nature, because just as Mother Nature is the caretaker of humanity and the provider for humanity, so we are the providers of lunch and clean school clothes for our children and for our family. How do we stand up for Mother Nature as female engineers?
Wow.
So that the voice of sustainability becomes not about just being able to abuse nature in the future, but actually partnering with her as an equal person?
Very interesting question. I'm going to add one more because I'm feeling very ambitious here. Thank you.
Things are getting bigger
in
and
the
bigger.
middle, yes, please. Sorry, Katie, just there.
Hi, thank you. I'm Xinfang Wang from University of Birmingham. It was very inspiring to hear Rachel's career experience in transport with not too much education background in transport before you come into that job. So my question is, how could we encourage more like women who didn't have a background education in engineer to be able to take up an engineering career afterwards?
Yeah, I'm so glad that topic's come up because I think we definitely wanted to get that in if you hadn't asked about it. Thank you. Rachel, do we go back to where Elizabeth started?
How young is too young?
The museum, London Transport Museum, does an amazing job of inspiring young people.
Absolutely. I mean, the reality is it's never too early to start, is it, really? In terms of, helping people to see how, I guess, engineering helps them in their everyday life in terms of what I was just talking about, but also just generally just understanding what engineering actually includes. The challenge in reality, and I've watched this over, I guess through my career, is always that if you are the employer of, some of these engineers, then by definition you need your pipeline to be relatively short term. It's really hard, isn't it, to get right up front and to figure out who is going to, be able to put real energy and, I guess, sustained effort into constantly trying to make sure that we are using the right language and that we're explaining that, this is engineering in terms of, and also these are real jobs. Because even at a very, very young age, kids will tell you what they want to be when they grow up. And some of them come up with quite creative things and you think, oh, okay, good luck with that. But how often do we hear some, a 4-year-old say, oh, actually, I'd really like to be I can't even think of an example. They might say they want to be a train driver, actually. They might say that, that kind of thing. They mainly want to be astronauts, don't they? Or ballerinas or YouTube stars, or TikTok stars probably now, isn't it? But maybe not at 4.
Not
but
another conversation.
I do genuinely think it's never too young to start. But I do wonder, going back to what I was saying around sort of missing a trick in terms of, where are the groups of people already using some of the words we want them to use? How do we harness that and get them to become part of that sort of movement, I guess, that in the end sweeps them through our doors? I think maybe that's something we might think about changing, because then it doesn't require such a huge effort to start something new. Because I think also we have a multitude of these initiatives.
More is not always more.
Yeah, and it's really difficult to know where the best stuff is and that kind of thing. I guess maybe there's a point around that to get it organised as well and so on. Yeah.
So the Academy hosts a This is Engineering campaign at the slightly older age group because it's social media based and we don't want our 4-year-olds looking at social media.
You show me a 4-year-old that's not seen an iPad around here.
We're just not endorsing that, Rachel.
No.
But I think there is always a role for other organisations to kind of come together around initiatives so we achieve critical mass and cut through, because I think our community has a tendency to fragment and we're all full of great intentions but not necessarily executing them in the most impactful and collaborative way. We've got Sally's question on learning to listen rather than learning to confirm.
And I think that picks up on one of the points I made really briefly earlier on. I completely agree. If we're going to accept the fact that as we sit right now, we have a community of engineers that are not as diverse as we might like them to be, that has to be the next step, is to learn how to engage better, how to tune in better and listen better. But I think that applies as much inside the engineering sort of groups of, teams of people and so on, as it does with the wider community out there as well. How often, I wonder, because I know I've experienced it over the years, how often do we feel that we make a point in a meeting, or we suggest an idea for a design, or we, come up with something that makes something better, and for some reason it doesn't quite cut through, and then it feels like somebody else suggests something remarkably similar, and then suddenly that's the way it's going to be done, and it was somebody else's idea and so on. And when I say somebody else, the chances are, given the diversity challenges we often have, that very often that would in fact be a male voice that had said it. I think I'm allowed to say it is the reality. It is the reality, and I think, I don't mean that to sound. It is a negative point, but I think maybe we can learn to adapt our behaviours as well, so that actually we give ourselves the best chance of being heard, but then equally we make sure we are always on receive mode as well in terms of listening. And maybe there's a role, coming back to your point around everybody in this room in some way, shape or form is already leading on various different things. Maybe there's a role for groups like this one to do much more to bring others with us. And I know that so many of us do that already, but there's always more. There's always more.
And also to specifically in the context of the curriculum, the Engineers 2030 work will eventually get to that question.
That was part of the question.
So it's not just about what are the desired behaviours and skills and knowledge, but how as a community are we going to then deliver that in a way that is effective. So sorry, there's not a neat answer yet, but we're working on it. And then we've got Isabel's question about creative thinking in organisations.
So I actually see a link between that question just now and Isabel, your question here as well, because I think, to me, the thing we might ask ourselves differently is, what does good really look like in terms of accelerating change? You know, what is good? And in terms of listening, you know, what is good? A good engineering solution is one that presumably meets the needs, as best we understand them right now, of the things that we are trying to, you know, get to in terms of outcomes. And they are not the same thing as they would have been 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So in terms of kind of accelerating that change and taking advantage of that increasingly diverse, you know, set of thoughts that we should be bringing through, maybe that's the key question: is what matters most? What does good look like? Because then maybe when we start to hear some of those ideas coming through, we can grab them and lock them in, rather than, you know, letting them sort of float on by and, as I say, do that copy paste of what we did last time and that kind of thing. I was in a meeting the other day. It was very odd, just earlier on this week, where somebody started to suggest that engineers almost weren't creative, which I found very odd, because it was almost as if, you know, we were all being trained into this kind of, you know, uniform engineer type mindset. I should say it wasn't a meeting anything to do with this wonderful institution, or indeed any other engineering institution. It was a clearly very badly informed meeting I was in earlier on in the week. But it was interesting to see the pushback that got, actually, in that room, where there were several people who were definitely quite creative thinkers and good engineers in that respect, and they were asking those right questions around, what is it we're trying to achieve here? Because that has to be the way to bring that creativity through, and having that bravery, I guess, to try things that are different.
And you know, we face a world where there's so many different dimensions of change and pressure that organisations having to respond to. Really, how are we going to make progress and stay competitive and effective and make an impact unless we are able to harness creativity? So it doesn't necessarily answer the process part, but at least the driver for change.
I mean, there's some really,
I'm conscious we must try and get through these.
One more sentence.
You know, we've got
never mind.
one more sentence, and then we're going to talk about Mother Nature.
It links to it. I was just going to say, there's some great examples in the carbon space, specifically on that more creative thought, actually, and the minute you genuinely bring carbon up to that senior table alongside cost and safety and all the other things that we know we're trying to achieve, it does change the conversation. Actually, it does bring that creativity through, but then you have to hold it and mean it.
So that links nicely into Mother Nature.
It certainly does. Gosh, where do we begin with this one? Yeah, so sustainability, this whole role of, I guess, women as providers, and the voice of the wider natural world, as well as the built environment and the engineering kind of world as well. Gosh, I don't think it's necessarily as closely linked as that, would be my initial thought. I think any people are more than able to see the obvious link, the fact that, you know, our world exists within the natural world. And anybody who can't yet see that hardwired link between the two, frankly, I'm not sure they should be calling themselves an engineer these days. So I guess I was a little worried when I heard you asking the question. I was thinking, gosh, is this another burden that we as women have to carry along with us? However, if the case is that we can be a voice of change, and that as numbers grow and as voices get louder and more senior and so on, that's something we could bring through with us, that would obviously be fantastic. But I don't think we should excuse others from being encouraged to think that way. There are some great examples out there. There's lots of talk around some nature-based solutions at the moment, that kind of thing. And I think there are a lot of engineers who are struggling to see how it all fits together. They don't quite get it. Why are we talking about this? Why aren't we talking about, you know? But actually, it only takes one or two examples, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I see. And these are difficult things, because you might build something smaller, you might not build something at all, you might rely on a natural solution to solve a problem that we'd normally pour a load of concrete to fix, or whatever it might be. That's hard, because it is a real shift in mindset. But actually, once you see it and you go, you know what, actually that works, we might find ourselves on a path.
I have a feeling these topics are going to continue over beyond our conversation up here.
Yeah.
We must also get to this point around, you know, you're a great example that you can sneak into engineering without an engineering qualification, and
sneak.
you can discover engineering without having chosen it as your first study, and we know that really, if we want to transform the diversity of our profession at the rate that we would like to, and on the other hand we look at the amazing different pressures on the workforce and how that's shifting availability of roles in different sectors, that welcoming people in, upskilling, reskilling, career conversions have to be a bigger part of how we see our workforce transform. Have you got any examples of where this is being done well, or any asks you'd like to make of the room?
The one immediate thought that jumped to mind as the question was asked, and it's just sort of pinging away in my head as you're speaking there, I think we don't realise how many people approach engineering as some sort of a career, have some sort of interaction on the edges of it, and are then switched off and turned away because for whatever reason they've picked up it's not for them. I mean, when I say I fell in by accident, I mean it was simply that nobody pointed out that the kid who took our clock apart and put it back together and it still worked might possibly be, you know, the kid who enjoyed making stuff, the kid who enjoyed sewing, the kid who, all this kind of stuff. Nobody ever said, oh, you know, that actually shows a bit of an engineering mindset. I was good at maths, I've got, you know, maths and chemistry and so on as A-levels. But nobody said, maybe engineering is a good answer. I went to uni and studied alongside engineers. I still don't know what they were studying, to be perfectly honest, because at the time I was doing a different subject. So I don't think it was sneaking. It was just totally by accident. I just found a job. Now, in the transport sector, I came across, through the work I've been doing with the DFT recently, which actually has just recently been wound up because there's a small election coming, so we've got new ministers. So anyway, never mind, we'll come back to life afterwards, hopefully. Really interesting examples, and a bit like that fragmentation point you were making earlier. So many efforts to attract people into different parts of even the transport sector.
Yeah, absolutely.
So into rail, into logistics, into roads, into buses,
sometimes
into
even
whatever.
competing.
All competing, and none of them, maybe not none, but very few of them, talking to each other. So you attract this pool of people and you bring them all together and say, hi, we've got all these wonderful jobs. Now that suits some of the people who turn up, brilliant, they might move into those jobs after they go, fine. Doesn't suit everybody, but instead of saying, but hang on, now you're here, can we just open up this menu of other options in engineering that you might not even have had any idea about? You know, these are all jobs too. That feels such an easy way to attract people.
I'm going to stop you mid-flow here because we very nearly are the time. I mean, I can hear Tommy's rumbling on the stage. I've got one final question for you. You know, you've talked about your children. You've had an extraordinary career so far.
They're not going to be engineers, by the way. I've failed miserably on that
front. That's not your personal responsibility. Plenty more to come. But you're speaking to a room of people, all of whom are committed to trying to diversify our profession. What would be your message to people who are considering migrating into engineering or considering migrating out of engineering, particularly women, based on the conversation today?
Really practical stuff I say to a lot of people. You know, mainly speaking to people who are already in, if you like. But you're right, maybe having a bit of a wobble about do I stay or do I not? Get qualified in whatever way is appropriate, because my first boss was very clear, it's like your armour. It's like your armour, you put it on, it's yours, nobody else can make you take it off, and you carry it with you wherever you go. Really important to me, a piece around women's networks that exist. There are so many of them around the engineering space. I know some people do a bit of an eye roll, you know, but actually they're amazing. They are amazing, and find the ones that are relevant to you, because you find your people, and then suddenly where you might have felt a bit alone, you actually find there are others, and there are lots of pockets of really amazing people out there, and it maybe gives you a bit of inspiration to stick with it. And I guess, I mean, also just look for, even informally, people to kind of guide you, mentor you. You don't even have to call them a mentor, it doesn't matter. Just people who can just give you advice and connect you up and help you network and all the rest of it. All those things, I think, help people to stay in.
That is a wonderful segue into what this lunch is all about. So over the course of the next hour or so, you're going to have the chance to chat around the tables. You're going to have the chance to go a bit deeper into the two questions that we've put on your tables for further interrogation. The first is, how do we ensure that diversity of thought is not just encouraged but actively integrated into engineering projects, both in industry and academia? And secondly, how can we better support women engineers at each stage of their career, to ensure they continue to thrive and advance in engineering. And then we're going to have a bit of time for feedback after that, which my wonderful colleague Rosa is going to facilitate. But a big part of the lunch is also about making those connections, meeting new friends, making the ask of people. If there's something on your mind and you think, I'd really love some help, or just to know, does anyone else have this? This is absolutely the space that you can do that in. So I hope we're going to have a wonderful lunch. But in the meantime, it's my honour to thank you, Rachel, for really sharing so openly your own experiences. And we have a small little gift to mark your contributions. We were delighted at National Engineering Day last year to be able to create... Nuri, can you open it? Sorry, do you mind? Thank you so much, Nuri. To collaborate...
My dad wants to do this.
To collaborate to create an Engineering Icons tube map, which is just the most fantastic thing. It's given us so much joy. And Rachel, you are a tube station. Do you remember which one you are?
Gloucester Road?
Gloucester Road. I was just testing you with text already.
I was thinking, God, am I going to get this right? Oh, my dad wanted to print this out. He printed it out at A4 and highlighted my name and put it on my kitchen table. This is much better.
So come on, let's give Rachel a wonderful round of applause.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. Very good.
Thank you so much. And
I'll add it to my pile of things I must get framed.
There's a photo still. Sorry.
Hang on.
Right, and I think whilst the paparazzi are doing their thing, the rest of you are very welcome to start talking amongst yourselves, and very, very shortly refreshments will appear. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you so much.
Oh, this is great.